What if the weakness you hate about yourself was never truly yours to begin with? What if it was installed quietly, over time, without your permission? And what if, in the next 23 minutes, you could begin removing it, layer by layer, until it no longer controls how you think or decide? Most people never ask these questions. They just live with the weight. They wake up tired, even after sleeping. They hesitate when they should act. They stay silent when they should speak. They settle when they know they were meant for more. And slowly, they start calling this state normal. But here is the truth: most people avoid. Weakness is not who you are. It is a condition. It is a pattern. It is a program that has been running in the background of your mind for years. Weakness is not always loud. It doesn't always look like failure. Sometimes it looks like comfort. Sometimes it looks like patience that has gone too far. Sometimes it looks like being nice, while your needs are ignored. Sometimes it looks like waiting for confidence, waiting for motivation, waiting for the right moment that never comes. Psychologically, the human mind is designed to protect, not to elevate. It avoids pain. It avoids risk. It avoids rejection. So it creates habits that feel safe, even if they slowly destroy your potential. That's how weakness grows. Quietly, gradually, without resistance. You were not born doubting yourself. You learned it. You were not born afraid of judgment. You adapted to it. You were not born lacking discipline. You were conditioned to avoid discomfort. Every time you chose the easier option, every time you delayed a hard decision, every time you let emotions decide for you instead of logic, the pattern became stronger. And the most dangerous part, weakness rewards you in the short term. It gives relief. It gives excuses. It gives comfort. But it takes something far more valuable in return: your edge, your clarity, your authority over your own life. Look around. Most people are not broken. They are simply unmanaged. They let moods dictate actions. They let fear negotiate boundaries. They let past experiences define future limits. This is why intelligence alone does not create strength. This is why talent alone does not create power. And this is why motivation, by itself, fades. Weakness lives in the gap between knowing and doing. That gap is psychological. The mind hates uncertainty, so it clings to what is familiar, even when familiar hurts. It convinces you that tomorrow is safer than today, that preparation is better than action, that thinking is progress. But nothing changes in thought alone. The moment you start seeing weakness as a system, not a flaw, you regain control. Because systems can be dismantled, patterns can be interrupted, programs can be rewritten. This is not about becoming aggressive. It is not about dominance over others. It is about self-command. The strongest people are not emotional. They are regulated. They are not reactive. They are intentional. They are not loud. They are consistent. And that consistency begins with awareness. In the next minutes, you are not here to feel good. You are here to see clearly, to understand why you act the way you do, and how to remove the invisible chains that keep you small. If you stay until the end, you will walk away with more than motivation. You will leave with a mental framework, a way of thinking that makes weakness uncomfortable to maintain, a shift that doesn't fade when emotions change. Most people will click away. They always do, not because this is too hard, because staying requires honesty. But if you stay, something subtle begins to happen. Your mind stops resisting, and weakness, for the first time, starts losing its grip. Once you see weakness clearly, it stops feeling mysterious. It stops feeling like a personal failure. And that is where real control begins. The mind does not betray you because it is broken. It betrays you because it is efficient. From a psychological level, your brain is a survival machine. Its first goal is not success. Its first goal is safety. And safety, to the brain, means predictability. That is why familiar pain feels less threatening than unfamiliar growth. That is why staying stuck can feel calmer than stepping forward. That is why your mind talks you out of bold action with logical, sounding excuses. Overthinking is not intelligence. It is fear wearing a smart mask. Every time you hesitate, the mind rewards itself by avoiding risk. Every time you delay, it feels relief. And that relief trains the brain to repeat the behavior. This is how weakness becomes automatic. Approval seeking is another trap. The brain learned early that acceptance meant survival, so it tries to keep you liked, agreeable, and harmless, not respected, not powerful, just accepted. That is why speaking your truth feels heavy. That is why setting boundaries creates guilt. That is why saying no feels harder than saying yes, even when yes costs you everything. The mind calculates emotional safety, not long-term strength. Then there is memory. The brain stores emotional pain more deeply than pleasure. One failure outweighs 10 successes. One rejection rewrites confidence. One mistake becomes an identity. So the mind protects you by shrinking your ambition. It lowers expectations to avoid disappointment. It convinces you that wanting less is maturity. But that is not wisdom. That is fear management. Weakness is reinforced every time emotion overrides discipline. When mood decides action, when comfort decides effort, when impulse decides direction. And here is the hardest truth to accept. No one trained you to control your inner world. You were taught what to think, not how to govern thought. You were taught what to feel, not how to regulate feeling. So when pressure rises, the mind defaults to emotion. It reacts instead of choosing. It escapes instead of enduring. It explains instead of executing. This is why willpower feels unreliable. Because willpower fights the brain. It does not reprogram it. The mind will always choose the path it knows best, even if that path leads nowhere. But once you understand this, self-blame loses power. You stop attacking yourself. You stop calling yourself lazy, weak, or broken. You realize something freeing. Your mind is not the enemy. It is simply outdated software. And outdated systems don't need punishment. They need upgrades. Strength begins when you stop asking, "How do I feel?" and start asking, "What must be done?" That question shifts authority from emotion to intention, from impulse to identity, from reaction to command. The strongest individuals are not fearless. They are trained. They have taught their minds a new definition of safety. Safety is no longer comfort. Safety becomes self-trust. As this understanding settles in, something changes. You stop trying to motivate yourself. You start positioning yourself. Because when the mind understands that growth is non-negotiable, it stops fighting and starts aligning. That alignment is where weakness begins to collapse. When alignment begins, resistance loses its voice. The inner chaos quiets down. And in that silence, strength finally has space to grow. This is where most people misunderstand change. They think strength arrives as confidence, as energy, as a sudden feeling of readiness. But real strength shows up differently. It shows up as willingness to act without reassurance, as calm execution without applause, as discipline that works even when emotion refuses to cooperate. Weakness does not disappear through motivation. It dissolves through exposure. The mind learns by experience, not by intention. You cannot think your way into strength. You must behave your way into it. The moment you choose discomfort on purpose, something shifts. Not dramatically, not instantly, but permanently. Controlled discomfort teaches the brain a new lesson. You can survive pressure. You can function without comfort. You can move forward without certainty. That lesson rewires identity. Discipline is not punishment. It is instruction. It tells the mind who is in charge. Every small act of discipline is a vote for a stronger self. Waking up when you don't feel like it. Doing the task before you feel ready. Staying silent instead of reacting. Walking away instead of explaining. These moments look insignificant, but psychologically they are massive. Because the brain starts associating self-respect with action. Not mood, not motivation, action. This is how confidence is built. Not through affirmation, through evidence. When you keep promises to yourself, the mind takes notice. It begins to trust you. And self-trust is the foundation of all power. Silence becomes another weapon. Not passive silence, intentional restraint. When you stop reacting emotionally, you break predictable patterns. You deny others access to your inner world. You conserve energy. You choose responses instead of being pulled into reactions. Emotion is not weakness. Uncontrolled emotion is. Patience is also misunderstood. It is not waiting helplessly. It is waiting strategically. It is the ability to delay gratification without losing direction, to hold position without losing hunger, to move slowly without losing momentum. The mind resists this at first. It craves stimulation. It wants quick relief. It wants to escape pressure. But repetition changes preference. When discipline becomes routine, effort decreases. When effort decreases, consistency increases. And when consistency increases, weakness has nowhere to hide. This is the turning point most people never reach, because it requires something rarer, the ability to act without emotional reward. No praise, no excitement, no instant results. Just quiet execution. This is where identity shifts. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying to improve. You start seeing yourself as someone who operates differently. You move with intention. You speak less, but mean more. You decide faster because you doubt less. Not because fear vanished, but because fear no longer has authority. The mind learns a final, critical lesson here. You do not need permission to be strong. You don't wait to feel powerful. You act in alignment with power, and the feeling follows. This is how weakness begins to die. Not violently, not dramatically, but steadily, quietly, irreversibly. Once this process starts, it does not stop, unless you stop choosing yourself. Once you begin choosing yourself consistently, your behavior starts to reorganize, not through force, through clarity. Weak habits don't disappear because you fight them. They disappear because they no longer fit who you are becoming. Every habit is tied to an identity. You don't scroll endlessly because of boredom. You scroll because, at some level, your mind expects distraction. You don't procrastinate because you lack time. You procrastinate because your brain associates pressure with escape. To remove weak habits, you don't attack the habit first. You remove its emotional reward. Impulsive behavior survives on instant relief. So when you pause, just for a moment, you break its cycle. Pause creates space, and space gives you choice. This is where boundaries become essential. Not loud boundaries, not confrontational ones, internal boundaries. Deciding what you will no longer tolerate from yourself. Deciding that certain behaviors no longer align with your standards. Deciding that comfort is not allowed to override commitment. When standards rise, excuses shrink. Routine is another misunderstood force. People think routine limits freedom. In reality, it creates it. When actions are automated, decision fatigue disappears. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop debating effort. You move without friction. Powerful people don't rely on motivation. They rely on structure. Structure removes emotion from action. And emotion is where weakness hides. Acting before motivation arrives is critical. Motivation is a follower, not a leader. It shows up after movement begins. The brain releases motivation chemicals after progress, not before it. So waiting to feel ready keeps you stuck. Unbreakable habits are built when action becomes non-negotiable, not extreme, not dramatic, consistent. Consistency does not require intensity. It requires loyalty. Loyalty to your long-term self over your short-term feelings. Loyalty to discipline over comfort. Loyalty to direction over distraction. Another shift happens here. You stop explaining yourself. Explanation is a form of seeking approval. Power does not need to justify its choices. When you act decisively and quietly, resistance fades, people adjust, circumstances shift, your internal world stabilizes. You also begin to protect your energy. Not everything deserves a response. Not everyone deserves access. Attention is currency, and weak habits drain it. When you reduce unnecessary input, noise, drama, comparison, focus returns, and focus is strength concentrated. With focus, effort feels lighter, progress feels cleaner, and identity solidifies. You no longer ask, "Is this hard?" You ask, "Is this aligned?" That question filters everything. Aligned actions compound. Misaligned ones exhaust. This is where discipline becomes self-respect. Not punishment. Not control. Respect. You follow through because you trust yourself. You show up because you don't abandon your word. You stay consistent because inconsistency feels beneath you. Weakness cannot survive in an environment of self-respect. It needs chaos. It needs excuses. It needs emotional disorder. When your inner world becomes structured, weakness starves. You don't feel invincible. You feel grounded. Calm replaces urgency. Clarity replaces doubt, and action replaces overthinking. This is not a phase. It is a standard. And once standards are set internally, life begins to respond differently. When standards become internal, something powerful settles in. You stop chasing control. You start embodying it. This is where identity locks in. You are no longer fighting weakness. You are no longer obsessed with improvement. You are simply operating from a different level. Your decisions become cleaner. You don't over-explain. You don't overact. You don't overthink. Not because you feel superior, but because your inner world is no longer chaotic. The strongest shift happens quietly. You begin to trust yourself. Trust changes everything. When you trust yourself, anxiety loses leverage. Fear still appears, but it doesn't negotiate. Doubt still whispers, but it doesn't decide. You move anyway. You don't need constant reassurance. You don't need validation to act. You don't need permission to choose what's right for you. This is psychological independence. Most people spend their lives reacting to emotions, reacting to opinions, reacting to circumstances. You stop doing that. You respond with intention. You pause before speaking. You observe before acting. You choose before committing. That pause is power. Weakness depends on urgency, on panic, on emotional pressure. When you slow down internally, you speed up externally. Your presence changes. People feel it before you say a word. Calm becomes noticeable. Confidence becomes assumed. Not loud confidence, grounded confidence. The kind that doesn't seek attention. The kind that doesn't argue. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything. You become harder to manipulate because you are no longer predictable. You become harder to shake because you are no longer reactive. You become harder to stop because you are no longer dependent on feeling good. This is what psychological strength looks like. You still feel emotions. You still face resistance. You still experience pressure, but you are no longer controlled by it. Your identity is now rooted in action, in follow-through, in standards. You do what you said you would do, even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. That builds something rarer, self-respect. And self-respect changes how life treats you. Opportunities feel different. Challenges feel cleaner. Obstacles feel temporary. Not because life got easier, but because you got stronger. You don't announce this change. You don't explain it. You live it. And over time, weakness becomes unfamiliar. It no longer feels like home. It no longer feels safe. Strength does. Not explosive strength. Not dramatic strength. Stable strength. The kind that compounds. The kind that lasts. You now understand something most never realize. Control of self is the highest form of power. No one can take it from you. No circumstance can remove it. No emotion can override it, unless you allow it. And you don't. Because you are no longer waiting to become strong. You are no longer trying to erase weakness. You have outgrown it. And once that happens, there is no going back.